He lives in.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Davenport Library. We're going to have a talk tonight about the cigar industry in Davenport, Iowa. My name is Merle Vastine. I have a nickname, Mick, called that sometimes. I was born and raised in Davenport. I've always been interested in history, and we have several things that I'm involved in, including history. I belong to the Scott County Historical and Preservation Society. I have a club. We have a history club that meets every week, and some of my activities. I'm on the board of directors of the Potosi Brewing Foundation in Potosi, Wisconsin. I'm also on the board of directors of the National Museum for Breweriana Collectors in Potosi, Wisconsin. So we'll start out by asking a question, and I know some of you already know because some of my cohorts are sitting over here. But does anybody want to make a guess at how many cigar manufacturers there were in Davenport from about 1852 up to 1961? Do you want to make a guess?
1,000.
1,000. That's a healthy guess, because we were considered the capital of the world of cigars at one time. There were actually 234 manufacturers. At one time, there was probably around the turn of the century, there were about 60 in business at that time. One of the things that got me interested in this was I was reading a city directory one day and looking down the different occupations in there. They had all these women's names and they were called strippers. And I thought, strippers, what in the world? And there page after page of them. Well, it was very common for a gal just coming out of high school to get a job in these factories because some of them employed as much as 350 people at one time. And these strippers were gals that took the cigar leaf and they stripped it off from the stem and made those, and they rolled them up, and that's how they made cigars. They made them nice and wet and put them in a mold. So the early cigar people came in what happened, there was a revolution in Germany in 1848. And that revolution, a lot of people were depressed and they were oppressed by the government. So they came to the United States, and we called them the 48ers in a lot of terms. And a lot of them came over here and they brought that profession with them, cigar making, which they drank a lot of beer and they smoked a lot of cigars, which was kind of a common thing, and also became pretty common here also. So in 1848, some of them migrated over, but the first ones actually, the first known one was listed as Bremer, I think, in 1852. And they were in business all the way from 1852. We had cigar makers all the way up to 1961. And in 1961, the last guy, he gave up. I think he had 2 employees. So we had the first cigar maker in Davenport was Wegener and Burge. They were the 2 first guys that did. In 1886, they were producing for Davenport about 13.7 million cigars a year. So that was quite a healthy business. And the cigars were distributed all over the Midwest. They sold them east and west, north and south. The tobacco that they used to make these cigars, several locations. One of the popular locations was Wisconsin. And if you drive up to Wisconsin today, up around Cuba City, Viroqua, those places, you'll see the drying barns in the fall, and you'll see the cigar leaves still hanging there. We also got it from Southern Illinois. We got it from Kentucky. We got some from Virginia, and imported some as far away as Holland. There was a special brand of leaf that they liked, and they made them out of Holland. Some of the early ones that were real big were Nicholascunan, Peter Jacobson, Harkert Cigar. Let's see who else we had. Ferd Hawk was a big one. Ferd Hawk had a factory down on 4th and Western Streets, and before that he was up on, I think, 7th Street, and his factory burned, and so he had to build a new building. So he built a new one there on right after the turn of the century on 4th and Western Streets, and the building's still there. But previous to that building being there, his son went into the business called the Globe Cigar Company, and it was built behind where the Ferd Hawk is today. And eventually, when he burned out, he took over his son's factory, and used it until he actually got the factory up and running, the new one. So, and if you go down that street and look, there's a crosswalk built between the two, about the third floor level. There's a crosswalk across between the Globe and the Ferd Hawk Cigar Company. Some of the buildings still stand in Davenport. We have the Raphael, we have the Harkard, we have the Peter Jacobson and the Ferd Hawk and the Globe. Those are mostly the ones that are still standing. The buildings are still standing in Davenport. They're all been used for different things over the years. But the women, as they came out of high school, it was a really neat job for them. And one time there was an article written about the article in the paper about the cigar industry in Davenport. And I had a picture that I published. It was the people working at Peter Jacobson. And I got a call from a couple of my friends saying, "Hey, that's my mother in that picture." Her name was Mercedes Parker. And so it was kind of neat to find that. But in 1905, Peter Jacobson put out 4 million cigars himself from his factory. And during World War I, he was producing about 250,000 cigars a week. And they had about 300 people working there. So as you know, the cigars were made, they were soaked in water and they put in molds, and then they wrapped them real tight. And what the cigar would do is form it whatever shape molds you could buy. There's about 250 different size molds you could buy from a local outfit in Davenport that actually sold the cigar molds. And what they do in the morning, the smokers would come into a cigar stop, and they had a little pouch, either leather or it could be metal. And they usually smoke 3 cigars a day. We call it morning, noon, and night. And what they would do is when they got their cigar, they had a trimmer setting on the counter, and they'd take and push down on the end, and they'd cut the ends off because when they were tight, they were sealed up on the end. So, but and they had several. There's about 5 known cigar companies that I know that have the trimmers, and they're kind of rare. I've only seen the 4 of them I've seen. I've got 4 that I've never seen before, and the one I have, somebody else has one of those too. So, but they would smoke their cigars, and they do their they probably a beer went along with it, they said in the article. So, but the like we said, we had a Cunin Cigar Company. He employed 350 people, and he was doing 750,000 cigars per month. Nicholascunan was a philanthropist here in Davenport, and he liked to see kids do well. So he actually had medals that he put out. They were sterling silver medals made by a local jeweler here in Davenport, Nabstead Jewelers. And what he would do is he'd give these kids, they did well, he'd give them a medal they were made out of sterling silver, a medal for deportment, and a medal for effort, for attendance for school, made sure they went to school. And actually the original stamp for those medals are in the Davenport School Museum here in Davenport. So, so being in competition with all these cigar companies, they had all kinds of advertising pieces that they put out. So they put out match holders, they put out combs, they put out a cigar box openers. They've had they had pocket knives. I mean, anything that was an advertising piece, pencils, even matchbooks back then. So it was very competitive with the cigar people. So as they progressed through their years, and they started out with very small businesses, like 1 or 2 people. They had them in their garages, in their homes. And I have a list here of all the cigar manufacturers that were in Davenport and all the years that they were in business. And then some of them, I think I have obituaries in here and different things that I show, but I also have a lot of different pieces. I also have about 230 cigar boxes from Davenport. You don't see a lot of them, but I've been collecting them for over 50 years. So I was around when and they say, boy, it's amazing that the cigar boxes lasted. Well, thank God for nuts and bolts, buttons, everything that people saved years ago. They just put it in a cigar box and they stuck it in the attic or in the basement or something, or put grandma's stuff in there, So the cigar boxes are lucky that they all survived. And some of them are really neat. I like especially the ones that they had at special occasions, like they'd make a box for Christmas, they make a box for Valentine's Day, they make a box for New Year's Day, and put that out special. I suppose everybody here has heard of Hickey Brothers Cigars in Davenport. Well, they had 143 stores in the United States and in Cuba, and they were also in New York in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And Hickey never made a cigar. They sold a lot of them, but they never made their own cigars. They were always made by somebody else. They were made in Cuba, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and even the local people in Davenport made some of their cigars. Now, a normal cigar box holds 50 cigars. And if every cigar box, if you look at the bottom of the box, it's required by federal law to put a stamp on there telling where the cigar was made, how many cigars are in the box, and the factory number, so you know exactly where that cigar came from. So if you see a cigar box and you pick it up, turn it over, it may not tell you the town. A lot of them will tell you the town, but Davenport didn't have many of the town on it, but it had it's Iowa District 50, and they would tell you the cigar box number, like 43 belongs to Otto Albrecht. That's another. He was one of the larger ones, and he started very early and ended early. He only made cigars up till about 1905. He started back in the 1860s. So the other things we have are, like I said, it was very competitive. So there's always a new thing to come up with to compete with the other guy. That's some had individually sold cigars, and cigar wrappers. People collected the wrappers. I probably got 50 different cigar bands that came off of cigars from Davenport. So I got really interested in that and got into the cigar industry. And a good friend of mine, Tom Quinn from Ottumwa, he wrote a cigar book on Ottumwa. So he contacted me and said, let's do a Davenport book. So we got our heads together and we did make a Davenport book out of it. So, but if there's any questions, you people are willing to come up with any questions, why you can answer anything you want. Otherwise, can they ask on the virtual too? Can they, Karen?
Yep.
If they want to ask any questions about that.
Yep, they can put it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Also, they had cigar lighters. We had a company in Davenport called Mazda Lighter, and they actually made a lighter that you could just go up to the thing and tip it up, and it would light automatically. And you could it had a battery in it to get a little spark, and you could put your cigar up there and light your thing. Or they had a type where they filled it with alcohol that you could turn it up. It acted like it looked like it had a little wick on it, looked like a oil lamp. And on that lighter, you could just put a little blowhole, you blow in the hole and it'd light your cigar for you. And on the other end, it held the cigar with a trimmer, so you could cut the end off at the same time.
Well, don't I remember that Hickey Brothers, at the counter, there was like a cigar lighter that you would.
They probably had, I don't have many pictures of Hickey Brothers or really any cigar stores inside. But they very well could have had one at the counter. They had a lot of matchbooks. They gave a lot of matches away, because I probably got 8 or 10 different matchbooks that were given out by Hickey over the years, different designs on the matchbook.
I remember the Hickey Brothers store next to the Fort Theater, which is now Circa 21.
Yes.
And they were right there on the corner. And the other thing I was going to say is my mother was from Manchester, New Hampshire, and they had a Hickey Brothers cigar store there.
Oh, yeah.
Because when she came to Rock Island, she was amazed that Hickey Brothers was here, because she thought it was, from there.
Hickey's always had a logo. If we forget to thank you, it's free. And they also gave out tokens, trade tokens, like good for 5-cent cigar, good for 2 cigars, or good for 10 cents, or good for a nickel, or whatever at their locations. And I started collecting Hickey tokens, and I think I have 480 different Hickey tokens from all over the country. But the real low numbers will be in Davenport. Number 1, number 2, number 3 stores are all in Davenport. And then we went to Rock Island and Moline and East Moline. They did the Quad Cities first, and then they moved on other places. I mean, almost every hotel in Davenport had a Hickey Brothers in it. They were a very large outfit. They actually I think they grew too fast and they actually went out of business in 1956. They closed up the Hickey Brothers Corporation. Their main offices are right here on Brady Street between 4th and 5th. Yeah.
Back in the 90s, gentleman in Rock Island that actually opened the Hickey Brothers cigar store down there. He bought all the stuff from the old Hickey Brothers that I believe was in the Davenport Bank building. And
Yeah.
they had in their basement, they had a lot of the signs and some of the
Yeah,
photographs.
actually, that Hickey Brothers was, if you came in off the Main Street entrance on that level, it was down steps from the main. And you turn to your right, that little Hickey Brothers cigar store was right there inside the Davenport Bank building. Yeah, I remember that well back in the 40s and
I have a
50s.
question for, or do you
Sure.
want-
No, go ahead. Questions are fine.
I'm just kind of curious, and going back. So when you look at like your cigar smokers today,
Mhm.
I think I don't know if they're a lot different, but when you look at the cigars that were manufactured back in the 1800s, they seem to be a lot smaller.
Today?
No, back then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the molds are pretty small. Actually, if you were smoking 3 cigars a day, I guess you didn't want 3 great big cigars, you know?
Right, but today it seems like the cigars are more of like a 50 to 60 ring gauge, whereas back then they looked like they were smaller. I'm kind of curious, was the cigar smoking back then the same as it is today? Like today, cigar smokers don't inhale the cigar or the smoke, they just
Puff it up, yeah, you
Was
know.
the cigars
I know a
back then
few.
more like cigarettes, or did the cigarettes put that type of cigar business?
Actually, that's what happened to the cigar industry. The cigarettes came along. They were much easier and smaller, faster, and that's why people went to cigarettes, and the cigars kind of faded away. But they do have like 3 or 4 different cigar lounges now in the Davenport area, I know.
Yes.
And the cigars are pretty good size. They're about that big around and they're pretty long. But they're not 2 for a nickel or a nickel anymore. They're about anywhere from $5 to about $20 a piece for a cigar. And
I used to work for a cigar manufacturer.
oh,
So I was a regional sales manager for the Midwest for a company called AJ Fernandez. AJ Fernandez has a factory in Nicaragua. Most of the cigars now come out of Nicaragua. About 57%
yeah,
of the cigars sold in the United States come from Nicaragua.
yeah,
The remaining come from the Dominican
Republic,
Honduras, and then there's a little bit that still comes out of Florida.
Florida.
The J.C. Newman in Yazoo City.
Oh, yeah.
Ybor City, I think it is, down there near Tampa.
Aren't there a few manufacturers in Cuba too yet?
Well, Cuba, of course, has a lot of the manufacturers. They don't sell cigars in the United States because of the embargo or whatever.
Right, yeah.
Back in '64, but those cigars for Cuba, they sell, around the world, Canada, Europe, and a lot of areas. Cuba still has, that lure of, it's almost like it's a forbidden thing. It's illegal in the United States in '64, so it's all Cuban cigars, and at one time they were the best in the world, but I think now Nicaragua is what
They compete better, do they? Yeah. Well,
And
I guess
because of
it's
the volcano.
yeah, that's
and the
the soil. They
nutrients they
talk
have in the
about how
soil,
to
yeah.
get the taste out of the cigar. Yeah. They're still done in the foreign countries too. I don't know how much Holland was a big producer of tobacco at one time, and they liked that taste of the tobacco. So they imported that into Davenport, and there's several of the Davenport people actually use the Holland grown tobacco for that. So, yeah.
We have a chat question, which
Okay.
kind of goes along with what you were just mentioning.
Mhm.
The question is, were they considered good quality cigars? Did they taste good?
Yeah, they did. And they used to do different things to the leaves, like a rum soaked cigar. You could get different flavorings put into cigars. But basically, I think originally they just wanted the good old smoking cigar, and they took, whatever they could get. I don't think they were very, they didn't ask about where did it come from, the tobacco that I'm smoking today or what. But I think it was pretty much without, but they got real fancy. They used to have something called the Mississippi Crooks, and they had the rum soaked ones and things like that, but kind of specialty type cigars. Yeah. So does that answer their question?
I think so.
Okay.
So did the Indians in their peace pipes, was that the tobacco that ends
Yeah,
up
they
in
smoked
cigars?
that. They smoked that. They smoked grass. They smoked peach leaves. They about anything they could get, I think. They even there was a vine that they used to smoke too. And just they'd take this vine and dry it out, and I think it was pretty hot though. But they'd smoke a vine. They had their stuff, and they had tobacco too that they grew. They grew their own products, you know. I mean, they just like their own food, you know. It was a kind of a thing that they used for that. So yeah, it's quite interesting because a lot of people say, well, my grandfather or my great grandfather, he used to make cigars and have tobacco and stuff. And I'd say, well, let's go back and check it. So we go look in the book, and by golly, we'd find a name way back when. I think, you know, everybody just thought this was a tale that somebody heard along the way, but really it's amazing how many people were involved and how many women. I'd say probably 2/3 of the workforce were probably women, because they had the tedious jobs, you know. And of course, the woman back then, she didn't get paid as much as a man either, you know. It's kind of discrimination, but that's the way the world worked back then. So that was the way it went. So
Did they have like today's cigars are humidified?
Yes, they do. What they did was they put them in what they call a cigar humidifier.
Okay.
Some of them would have little atomizers that they would keep the humidifiers moist all the time. But they also had a little piece called an atomizer. I called it a mister. And every morning when they'd come in to open up their cigar shop, they'd open up the cases, and they had it acted like a venturi. They'd put water in it, and then you blow across that, and they'd make a mist out of there, and they blow that into the cases to get all the cigars moist for the day, because they dried out pretty darn fast.
Right.
You know, the old heating systems were usually coal, and that was a very, very dry heat. You know, a lot of people have to put a pan of water in front of their register just to keep enough moisture in the air. So they misted those cigars every single day. So yeah, it was quite a process for doing that.
Well, because cigarettes are, when the cigarettes are developed, they don't require the humidification because cigarettes have all that added chemicals,
Right. Yeah.
formaldehyde.
But they will dry out if you get an old pack. You know, they do dry out. So
Did the job where they're in there wrapping the cigars, really monotonous, kind of dull, and didn't they?
I would
provide-
say probably it would be. It's like anything repetitive, you know. I mean, now we would, anything that we did like that by hand back then would be done by a machine today. But I'm sure that, and they probably had, I don't know if they gave bonuses or like, you know, like piecework. The more you do, the more you get paid or something. I mean, I've never talked to anybody recently that did that. In fact, most of them are all gone that worked at a cigar factory. So
I read that they had some sort of entertainment, like someone would read to them.
Right.
yeah,
They call them down in, I think it's called a torcedor.
torcedor.
Yeah, I believe that's the Spanish term, but it's the person that sits up in the front where all the rollers are rolling, and that person would read stories or whatever. Like, he's exactly right, entertaining.
The
But
best.
this is you're talking, and especially in these other countries, pre-radio, you know, like having music and stuff. Nowadays, they use, you know, you can see them in the factories, they have
Earplug,
iPods
yeah.
and what's not. But it's a tradition that has held in these up. I know in the Nicaraguan factories or whatever. That's interesting that was a tradition that was held in our factories.
Yeah, because that had to be very monotonous and boring, you know, just to sit there and do the same thing over and over and over again. Actually, I'm lucky enough to have a set of pictures from the Peter Jacobson Cigar Factory, which was down on the corner of 4th and Harrison Streets at Davenport, which the building is still there. There's been several things over the years after the Cigar Factory, but I have probably a collection of about 20 some pictures showing each step that went on during the making of the cigars. And the biggest thing was the women stripping all the leaves. A lot of the guys did the roll type thing, rolled them up and put them in the molds and so forth. But there were several, I mean, they had like about 5 different jobs that they qualified as the roller, the stripper, the packer, the different jobs that they had in the cigar factory. So,
Wasn't
and
there a president that made a statement back in that era? What this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar.
yeah, I think there was, yeah.
I'm trying to remember who did that.
Maybe Koki remembers who said that.
No, but I can look it up.
Look it up.
Yeah, is it in the-
Okay,
is it in your book?
yeah. Um,
What about the people, you know, you go look at the old fire insurance maps and in the neighborhoods, there's always like in an alley, a garage, and it'll say cigar factory.
yeah, that's true.
You know, every neighborhood. has-
Every neighborhood, I don't think there was, and why did they pick on Davenport to be the big cigar place? And I think it's because so many people came over in 48, the Germans, and they brought the brewing industry and the cigar industry with them. And people had those talents already in Germany that came over, and they all happened to just settle here. And there was very large percentage of Davenport was Germans, you know, and they had the breweries and the tobacco industry under control
They
here.
probably sat in those bars.
And consequently, they had a lot of the bars, yeah. If you look at the names in the book here, I mean, there's predominantly 95% of them are all German names, you know.
Where can we buy the book?
Pardon?
Where do we buy the
You can buy it from me
Really?
if you're interested, yeah. I'll have a few for sale after the meeting. I bought them in different styles. This is the ring binder here, the spiral wound. And people like this because you can open it flat.
Right.
The other ones are a little different. That's got a hard binding on that one. And then I have another one that it's kind of a semi-hard binding. It's got a little thinner cover and back, and it's got the same back spine on it that the front and back have on. So,
Can I get it in Braille?
yeah, pardon? I didn't hear that.
Can he get it in Braille?
Braille, yeah. Well, I guess you can do most anything these days. But and a lot of them just for the advertising purposes, like particularly Otto Albrecht, he'd take some real nice fancy stock picture of a woman, and then on the back of that card, he would put all of his cigars, the quantities, and the type of cigar, and the amount and the price. He'd put pricing in a box with the box of cigars. So I have several of those cards. In the front, they look just like a beautiful picture. Then you turn it over, it's got their list on there. So, like I say, they were very competitive with the things. And then they had signs. They had one of the things that I just recently found out that I didn't know. I learned something new every day about something anyhow. But anyhow, Perd Hawk went out of business in about 1923, and he had a book of matches. So I got this book of matches thinking nothing of it. Looked like an ordinary book of matches. And when I opened it up, the part that you light with the fire part, usually on a match is about like this. Well, the fire part's like that. And so it only makes sense. It took a little longer to light a cigar than a cigarette. So you had this long light piece on it. So I've talked to several of my cohorts and my friends and my historians, and none of them have ever seen that before. And that's the only one I've ever seen. And I've asked around the country, and they've never seen anything like this. So he was pretty innovative with coming up with something like that, So
Mick, the lithographs on the inside of the lid,
yes.
were those made by some artists or something?
Yes, they were artists all over, not necessarily local, but they were very good at it. I think there was a big competition to see who could do the best litho, because there are some fantastic lithos. One of the real great ones is Peter Jacobson's. His flagship motto was called Brown Beauties, and they have two Indians kind of facing each other, and it's just a gorgeous, all in color. And they also on his cigar top countertop lighter, it's got the same picture that has inside the cigar box with the Indians in it. It's a really beautiful piece, and you know, I don't know if we have the lithographers today that we had back then. But it's just they do it with a computer, but I don't think the computer could do as good a job as the people that did it by hand. So, but they're just absolutely beautiful. Like I say, I got about 230 different boxes. Every one of them's got some kind of a feature on it that looks really nice, you know.
So when you go into the cigar store, they were open?
Yes, the top is open.
See those real pretty pictures.
Some of them had also a glass cover that you'd slide it down over the lid. And so when you tip the lid up, that glass cover would open up. So that was to keep the cigar moist at all times when you misted that during the day. And when you ended up flipping the top up, you get your cigar out and flip it back down and it's sealed again.
I think the cigar opener, box openers are neat too, because there was that little nail.
Every cigar box in the wooden and when they made them later in cardboard, they put it together and they put a little nail in it. And then there's advertising that they would give you a box opener so you could open your own box, and it had a kind of a sharp edge on the front, and you'd pry the box open, and on the other end there'd be a little hammer of some kind so you could nail it back shut again. One interesting about the cigars in the boxes, if you bought a cigar at Hickey Brothers, if you bought the second to last one out of the box, the last one was always free, they say. So if there was 3 cigars in the box, you bought 2, you got 3. Or there was 2 in the box, 1 and 1. So there was never one left in the box.
So how much would a whole box cost?
Well, the guy that used to cut my hair when I was a kid, he liked cigars, and he liked King Edwards, I think was the brand I used to buy him. And I used to get those down at the Bond Walgreens store. And now this is back in the 50s. Probably for around $3, $3 to $4 a box for cigars. That was 50 cigars. But yeah, today I think you pay a whole lot more than that for just one cigar. I was talking to a guy the other day. I said, "How much do you pay for a cigar?" And he says, "Well," he says, "it depends on how I feel. If I want a real good cigar," he says, "I'll have to dish out $20 for a really good cigar." Yeah.
Wow.
And I think there's some that go for more than that even. I don't know but a lot of the economy type ones that were made by some of these people, like some of the boxes say 2 for 5 cents, some of them say 5 cents, some were 7 cents. And then you get these trade tokens again, and then you find a trade token from like Cunan. I have a trade token from Nicholascunan. This is good for 1 cigar. So what you do is go in and buy some cigar, and the guy give you a token, because he wants you to come back in again and buy more. You take your token back in and get a free cigar. So, but those tokens are kind of vanished too. I can't find those anymore either. So
Today, the boxes of cigars for your, I guess you would say your popular ones, you get about anywhere between 20 and 24 cigars per box, and the price would be about $175 to $280
For a box,
most of the cigar stores operate on what's called Keystone pricing.
Mhm.
So if it's a $200 box cigar, it costs the cigar store $100, and then they'll sell it for $200.
Yeah.
But that's about where they're at. There's cigars that are more expensive. There's some that are less expensive, but you're not going to find for a box of cigars anything less than $100.
I would say that's probably true.
And if you're looking at Cubans, which you can get like out of Canada, and if you want a biscuit, because I think that customs will, if they see that it's Cuban cigars, grab them.
And I think they're still
Cubans are
pretty.
like about 400 to maybe $400 or $500 for a box.
Oh yeah.
Of 20.
20.
Of 20.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the federal taxing on tobacco is still really high, and I think that's what
It
you're
is.
really paying for a lot, is because the tax is just like our gasoline tax. We're paying, well, most of it's all in taxes,
It depends on the state. So in Iowa, I believe there's a cap at 50 cents per cigar.
Oh, is
So
there?
they have they have the.
No matter the
taxes,
cost, huh?
but they put a cap on it. Most of the mail order companies come out of either Florida or Pennsylvania. In Florida and Pennsylvania, there's a federal tax. Everyone pays the federal tax.
But no state tax.
But there is no state tax
Yeah.
in those two states. Texas is another state that they come out of sometimes. Texas has a tax 3 cents per cigar.
Oh,
But
that's,
that gives them that price advantage when they're selling. But yeah, you get into like Illinois, it's like 25% of whatever the price.
Price of the
cost
cigar,
of
yeah.
cigar.
Yeah.
Minnesota is like 120%. Oh yeah, there's California, some of these states just, what they've done is they've lumped the even cigarettes.
I was just gonna ask, is
Yeah.
that correlating with
They're
cigarettes?
trying to correlate with the cigarettes, so there's a lot of fight out there because with the cigars, it's generally people who are smoking them by feeling them, they're not addicted to them. You can smoke a cigar and you don't get that nicotine craving like with a cigarette or chewing tobacco or whatever. You get addicted right away and then it's hard to quit. Whereas cigar smokers don't have the addiction because it's not a nicotine delivery device. It's more of a pleasurable thing, but it's the line gets kind of crossed. So they do tax on that.
Do you remember White Owl cigars?
I sure do. Yeah, they weren't local though. They were imported type thing.
Well, I remember my grandfather, my dad would bring him a box of White Owl cigars every now and then. And my dad would say he smoked them, but I never saw him light one, but they would disappear.
Yeah,
He
they
would-
chew them up, and eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Well, that's part of, I think, and I don't know if that's part of your presentation here, but that the decline, not only were the cigarettes becoming a decline, but was the machine manufacturing. So White Owl and Dutch
Oh, I
Masters,
remember them too.
and those cigars are, and Phillies, you have the Phillies cigars.
Mhm.
Those cigars are machine-made cigars. So they're kind of like cigarettes in the sense they use a fake or a manufactured leaf, and it's a loose fill tobacco that's filling those. The Phillies come with a hole in the top of them, or the White Owls, they'll have like a little hole in the top. But when you smoke, those people that are smoking those cigars, they're not like what the type of cigars that were manufactured in Davenport.
Yeah.
So many years ago, because those were long leaf tobacco. So it was the long leaf, and like you were saying, they'd strip them down and then they would actually use another leaf to wrap or roll the cigar. Whereas those machines came in and started mass producing things like White Owl.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember as a kid, I remember people smoking cigars, and really, nobody in my family ever really smoked cigars. I smoked a couple when I was in college because we used to have a poker night on a Wednesday night, and one of my good friends worked for a tobacco company, and he'd bring these Dutch Masters cigars. So I tried a few of those, but I never got hooked on cigars. But one of the things I remember is going to the carnivals and to the fairs. They always had this thing where you hit the thing and try to ring the bell, and then they'd say close but no cigar.
Yeah.
Well, if you did get a cigar, the cigar was about 10, 12 inches long, and it was about this big around. So as you walked around the fair, you saw some guy with that big cigar in his mouth, he rang the bell. So he was very proud to walk around the fair and show you that he won that big fat cigar. And I do have 2 of those big fat cigars in my collection. So also there's a lampshade that you put over a light, and I don't know how they survived that long, but it's a turn of the century piece. They also had little pocket mirrors. You had a pocket mirror in your pocket so you could take out and see how pretty you were. Well, the cigar companies are very competitive in using those as advertising pieces too. So, but we just don't see that type in pencils. You don't see that type anymore either. Another thing about the cigar manufacturers is Davenport was a very big area for baseball. And if you walk by the cigar manufacturing place, I have pictures where they have in the window baseball today, which meant they had a ball game today. So they were always promoting the baseball too. And I suppose if you went to a baseball game, it was pretty smoky with everybody smoking a cigar. And they even had some of their advertising pieces. They have little bats about this long advertising cigars on them. Of course, they had ashtrays, they had tip trays, they had little metal containers that would hold 3 cigars, and you carried your pocket. Then they put their name on the cigar holder, so you know whose cigars you bought. Just a reminder that if you're going to buy a cigar, maybe you buy those, you know. So, but yeah, and the funny thing about it, I was looking through some stuff the other day, and I opened up one of my boxes, and there were 2 original cigars in the box. Yeah, and I think that's the only box that I had that had original cigars in it. But they're not very big. They're just little short things like that, and they've been trimmed on the edges. So, but
What's the story with the cigar bands? I remember wearing them for rings.
Yeah.
yeah, well,
And then people would glue them under a piece of glass.
yeah, they put them on. Actually, I have a jar that's from the Nicholascunan cigar company. It's a glass jar, and there was 50 cigars in it, and it's about this big around, has a lid on it, turns off, and on the bottom embossed is the factory number and the cigars, which was, they had to do that in any kind of a container that they shipped it. And somebody took the trouble to put all kinds of cigar bands all around the outside of that, and there's several Cunan bands, and of course it's a Cunan jar, and then they had a deck of cards with somebody who had a card, all the different cards you could buy a cigar and try to get all the different, like all spades, all hearts, whatever. And so they tried to make it a collecting thing so people would buy, oh, I need that one, I'd buy that whether I need it or not, just to get that band. But there's a huge band collections of that. And then they had, when you'd buy a certain number, they'd put them in a band, a big band. So you'd buy 5 or 10 cigars at a time rather than buying just one cigar, then they give you a little better deal on that. So, but oh, those cigar box openers, they were quite the deal. And we were so big in cigars here in Davenport, they actually had 3 cigar box manufacturers in Davenport. They manufactured cigar boxes, but not only for Davenport, but Muscatine, Long Grove, the Illinois side of the river, everybody, you know, they made boxes for everybody. And most of them were wood up till about the 1930s. And then they started making cardboard boxes. And they still had the nail in them. They still had the information on the bottom of the box. And then some guys, like Cunan and those guys, they would let the people buy their name to make that say, like Papoose was a big one for Cunan. And they would let people buy that name and make Cunan. So there's about 4 of them in Davenport that made the Papoose cigar, but Cunan was the original. And on his trimmer, it says Papoose right on it. But Simon and Company had one. I think maybe Harkert made one from that. But the only way you can tell is when you get the box, you just turn the box over and it'll tell you on there whose factory it was. So, and I have all my Hickey boxes that I have. I would say the greater portion were from Davenport. A lot of the ones that I have are from Davenport. Of course, it makes sense because they're in this area. They probably stayed around this area. And like I say, with nuts and bolts and things like that, that's I used to love to go in old barns and look, because of the farmer would always put nuts and bolts and screws and nails and things like that in them, you know, and you'd find a box that's from Davenport. So
So the only difference between like a Gerd Hack and a Jacobson cigar might be the leaf that they used, where they got their leaf?
not necessarily.
Or does
I
it
think
taste any different
I
to
think
you,
that a
or-
lot of the tobacco came in bales. And I don't know if there was probably some kind of a supplier up in, maybe like in Wisconsin, a salesman, and he would take and sell it to maybe 4 or 5 different outfits here, maybe 20 different outfits here, but he sold it all over the country.
But was there any difference in, why would you buy a Jacobson instead of a Gerd Hack? Did they all look
Well,
alike, or were they different?
you probably could tell the difference between the taste of the cigar, the smoking. And like one guy, he might get his from Wisconsin, the other guy's getting it from Southern Illinois, Kentucky, the guy, he's imported from Holland. They say, what kind of cigar is this? And the guy, well, that's from Holland, you know. And I'm sure they all had a little bit different taste. And like he tells you, the soil is what makes the different taste in the tobacco and the type of fertilizing and things that they did to those tobaccos. But it's really interesting in the fall. If you go up through Wisconsin, you can see all that stuff hanging in the barns yet. And
Is the barn a different shape or something?
well, they're kind of shaped like an open shed.
Okay.
And you know, like you'd have cattle in, you know, it's open on the outside. It's got a roof over it, of course, to keep it from getting soaking wet. But they call them drying barns up there, and there's quite a few of them. If you drive up there now, you can see the old drying barn. You'll say that there's no cattle in there now because it's a drying barn. So, yeah.
The drying barns when the tobacco is harvested, it's fermented. It's fermented in barns by heat, and they're stacked, and the bales are stacked on top of them. The weight of the tobacco on top of there produces a heat and ferments them. And then after so long, then they're taken off there, they're put in where they're like tied up, hanging, and then that's why they're put in the barns to dry them out, so that they're kind of get them to the right amount of humidity or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why
And another
would
thing on
why
the
would they let
taste-
them ferment in the first place, though?
Hmm?
Why would they let them ferment in the first
Well,
place?
you don't really have any choice.
Yeah, I think because to keep, like, for the flavors and what's that? The moisture, releasing a lot of the different things, and it's a conversion process. Just the fermentation process is breaks down the sugars and kind of which do with alcohol or with wine, or which process.
Is it different for cigarettes? The
Well,
way they
yeah,
harvest
I
them?
don't know how cigarettes are done, but I know cigarettes is just tobacco that's just harvested up, and ground up. And then with a cigarette, and this is what really makes the cigarette so dangerous, is that then that tobacco, in order to preserve it, is mixed with formaldehyde. They mix additional nicotine into it. They put different tars and what's not are added to that tobacco. So, and it's in order to keep it in preservation. That's why the cigarettes, you can dry out a cigarette, but in most of them they don't dry out. They stay in the pack and they stay fresh for a period of time. But when you smoke them and you're inhaling that not only are you getting the tobacco, but you're getting the formaldehyde, you're getting the other things that are added to that chemical ingested. But the flavors on the tobaccos, like he said, not only it's the soil, but it's the way they harvest the tobacco plant. The tobacco plant grows in vertically up as flowers top, and then the leaves, there's different layers of leaves. So your more potent or stronger flavored tobaccos are the ones that are grown close to the sun, which would be the top layers. As you go down on the layers on the tobacco, the taste it changes. So when they harvest the tobacco leaves, a lot of times they call them prinings. They go through and they cut the top layers of the leaves off, and they go down and do the next layer of the leaves. And so you may hear the term Connecticut shade. So if you go out to like Connecticut, where they grow a lot of those are used as the leaf that they use for the wrappers, and it's Connecticut shade. They have all the it's like cheesecloth. You'll see fields of like sticks or whatever with the cheesecloth, and that's in order to shade the tobacco from the sun, because the sun is what gives it the nutrients and the harshness that a stronger tobacco, because a shaded tobacco is less potent.
And they never wasted any of the tobacco either. When they get through with all those shavings, they would scrape them off the floor. They put them in a tin, and they'd call it chewing tobacco. So
Oh, God.
they used every bit of the tobacco down to the smallest part. So, and of course, then they'd some of those chewing tobaccos, they'd put different things in them for flavors and things like that as the more recent times. But like they call it tobacco cuttings for chewing. So that would be the stuff that was left over, you know, so they didn't waste anything off that. So when you bought a tobacco leaf, whatever you bought in a bale, you're gonna use it all up, so. And that includes the stem and everything else, so, yeah. I don't really have too much else. If anybody's interested, I could tell you a little bit about the brewing industry in Davenport. We also brought in, when they came over the 48ers, they also bought the best brewers from all around. And our first brewery in Davenport was the Matthias Fromm Brewery down on Harrison Street between 5th and 6th Street on the west side of the street. It's a parking lot now, but back in the day, it was the original building. And it's fun to read the stories about that and how they brewed stuff and became a living sewer. The Harrison Street was a living sewer all the way, open sewer all the way to the river. But one of the unique things about that brewery, the family, after they had brewery go up and go, and they built a house up on the corner of 6th and Ripley Streets. And that's a block away, but the brewery is this side of the alley, on the other side. They actually ran a pipe from the brewery, a live pipe up, and they had in their kitchen, they had a live faucet where they could turn on and have brewery that they brewed a block away in the house. And that's still in existence today, as far as I know, that the valve is there anyhow, but not the pipe anymore. So, but we had a lot of nice brewing in breweries in Davenport, and that's another story we can talk about some other time probably. And then we also were famous for something else in Davenport. We were called the capital of the world for what machine do you think we were? Anybody got a guess? I know these guys all know. Wash machine. We were the wash machine capital of the world. We had about 7 or 8 different wash machine companies that manufactured wash machines back when they made the old wooden wash machine and ringers and so forth. We were very, very big in that. And they have a lot of advertising from Davenport for the wash machine industry. So and that's another to talk about. Yeah.